So in the last video, in this module on algorithmic composition, I want to broaden beyond some of the examples that we've been coding up in Python and look at something that's a little bit more advanced. This notion of musical modeling. And this actually carries forward from some of what we looked at in the very first video in this module when we looked at the Iliac suite by Hiller and Isaacson, and that generate and test paradigm, the way that they were encoding different rules about composition into their software. And getting the output to follow those rules, whether it be a counterpoint or voice leading or whatever. I want to look at two more recent systems now, right now, to show you where these ideas have kind of come in the field of algorithmic composition. So we're going to look at David Cope's system called EMI and Francois Pachet's system called the continuator. EMI, which David Cope's been working on since the early 1980s, stands for Experiments in Musical Intelligence. And the basic idea behind it is that you analyze some database of existing musical works. And this is done not audio files, it's a MIDI kind of representation that you're analyzing. So you already have the data at a kind of note level of representation. And it's a very specific database. So it might be minuets by Mozart or two-part inventions by Bach or something like that. So a kind of series of very similar works. And his software tries to discover particular rules that guide the creation of those works and particular signature motifs or ideas that come up over and over and over again in them. And it uses these rules and these kind of signatures to then start creating a large number of works that mimic the style of those in the database that it's analyzing. Now, this has been a very controversial idea over the years, and a lot of people really say horrible things about EMI. And I think some of them criticize the particular algorithms that he's using, or kind of take him to task on some details. But most of the criticisms really come down to this very idea of why you would want a computer to try to compose works in the style of the great classical masters. I think this is something that a lot of people find very disturbing and upsetting, especially if they or anyone else they know is fooled by these, which often happens. I think it raises some deep philosophical questions about what composition and what musical creativity really are. But I want to focus on kind of how David Cope tends to put forward his motivations for pursuing this project, because they're very different from the ways that people often kind of frame it. And so some of the things that he tends to mention time and time again in his writings about EMI, for his reasons for pursuing this research for such a long time, is first of all, he hopes that through analyzing this corpus of works and discovering these rules and signatures, they will actually learn something about the source style. So it's a kind of a music theory tool in a way that helps us learn things that we might not learn otherwise. The same way that a first-year music theory student in a course might be asked to compose something in the style of a Bach chorale or an invention or a fugue or things like that, to learn more about these styles through modeling. Well, if we look at what the computer software has learned as it's trying to model, we might learn something about those styles that we didn't know before. And this isn't part of our current pedagogy or our current research practice. Second is it may be a way to create compelling music independent of its relationship with the source. And a lot of that depends on what the sources are that are put in. And it also depends on what the selection process that the composer or the operator goes through. They may generate hundreds or thousands of different model compositions and only select a handful of them they think are musically satisfying enough to be worth sharing and performing. Another thing is that this can serve as a really interesting kind of composer's assistant. One of the reasons that Cope originally turned towards this work was that he was kind of burned out. He had some severe writer's block as a composer. And so he started modeling other styles of music as a way to kind of get around that writer's block. But you could also imagine an interactive tool that as you're composing with computer software, if you ever get stuck or you're looking for new ideas, you can just hit a button on the screen, and it will immediately present you with a lot of possible continuations of the idea that you've already put forth based on its knowledge of the music you've written up to that point, and also perhaps based on analysis of other works that you've composed in the past. And finally, I think there's an argument here that, that musical composition, algorithmic composition, is an interesting problem domain for machine learning and artificial intelligence, and it can present particularly unique problems to solve that can lead to larger research gains in those fields. So I wanted to bring up one other example here, which is the continuator by Francois Pachet. And this is a similar kind of idea of style modeling, but it brings it into a very different context. So ME is a composer. The output of ME system are MIDI files that can then be either played back as MIDI data or are turned into musical scores and performed by human beings. The continuator is really meant as a live performance tool. And Pachet puts it very elegantly on himself, so I just wanted to read this quote of his. The purpose of the continuator is to extend the technical ability of musicians with stylistically consistent, automatically learnt musical material. And so it's really focused on live performance and on improvisation in particular, inspired almost by this notion of trading fours or trading eights that jazz musicians will do, where one player will play and then the next one will play and they'll go back and forth over and over and over again. So it becomes this kind of conversation that unfolds over time. And so a human being will perform some music, and the continuator will listen and analyze to that. And then after a certain amount of time, the human will stop playing, and the continuator will take over and kind of continue their idea and run with it. And then after a certain point, the continuator will stop, and the human will start improvising again. And a performance will consist of a number of these kind of back and forth exchanges that way. Again, the continuator usually works in the symbolic domain, so it's working with MIDI data that's coming in, sending MIDI data out. So we're not dealing with questions of audio analysis. That's something I'll actually look at in the first video in Module 6, is how we extract information from audio data. But both ME and the continuator are really working primarily in the MIDI domain.